Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, the second of our evenings that we're calling Good News for Bad Times. My name is Aidan Toomey. I'm a parishioner here at Holy Innocents Parish in Orpington. Very good evening to everyone in the parish and to our friends at Churches Together in Orpington. Very warm welcome if you're joining from the Archdiocese of Southwark. Lovely that you can join us. We would like to thank the Archdiocese for their sponsorship and support, especially Mark Nash, I think, is with us tonight from the Archdiocese Centre for Evangelisation and Catechesis. Mark. If you're joining us from further afield, from around the country, from Ireland or from further afield, it is lovely to have you. If you would like to see recording of last week's session, it is on the Holy Innocents YouTube channel, and you can find a link to that on the parish website. We'll say good evening again to Father Nicholas King, who is a Bible scholar and a translator of the Bible. He's joining us from Campion Hall in Oxford. Good evening, Nick. Good evening. Last week, our topic was evangelization, where you took us through all the occurrences of the word in the Gospel of Luke and Acts of the Apostles, which we call Luke Acts. And this week, I believe it's some spiritual press-ups. It's the subject is going to be discipleship. But with that, Father Nick, over to you. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, good evening, and it's nice to be back with you all. And as Aidan has just said, it's discipleship we're looking at today, and that's a matter of how you and I are supposed to behave. And it's mainly in Luke. Last week I concentrated on both Luke and Acts. Next week, when we'll be talking about fellowship, I'll be talking mainly about Acts of the Apostles, but tonight it's mainly Luke. Now, Luke, I think I said this last week, is a wonderful artist. He paints with words, and many artists have tried to cover the paintings that he's done and paint the stories he's told. And I want you to watch how Luke paints a picture as we go through tonight. And right at the beginning, in chapter 2, I want to read with you 2 points where he gives you rules for wandering around his picture gallery. It is a picture gallery, especially the first 2 chapters. And here's the first rule. It's what Mary does. Mary was keeping all these things in her, comparing them in her heart. That's just after the story of the shepherds coming on that first Christmas night. Then the second is almost the same. It comes pretty well immediately after the extraordinary story of the finding of the child Jesus in the temple. And it's at 2:51 if you're chasing through your Bible. Jesus went down with them and came to Nazareth, where he was subordinate to them. And his mother was comparing all these things in her heart. Those 2 rules, watch Mary doing that, and make sure you do it yourself as you listen to Luke telling you his story. And then another picture. This is what disciples do in Luke, and you'll find this at 10:41 to 42. Our old friend Martha and Mary. I'll just read the two verses of that story. We'll be coming back to it later on. The Lord said to Martha, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and anxious about many things. There's only need of one thing, for Mary has chosen the good portion, which is not going to be taken away from her." So there are 2 ways of doing discipleship. One Martha's way and the other Mary's way, and we need them both. So what do disciples do in Luke? Well, 2 things. One is they look like Jesus and they do what Jesus does. And secondly, they discover that life can be very difficult. So if you have found your Christian discipleship difficult, it doesn't mean you've made a mistake. It may mean that you're exactly on the right path. So now I'm going to start with the first calling story that you get in in Luke, and it's the story of Simon Peter. And I'll just read the story with you and then say a few things and listen to it as spoken to you, because you are a disciple, and this is what happens to disciples. And it happened when the crowd was pressing on him and listening to the word of God. That's Jesus' word, but it's the word of God. And he was standing by the lake of Gennesareth. Let me just pause on that. That word lake, did you notice that? Normally we think of Gennesareth as a sea, the Sea of Galilee. But Luke is telling the other evangelists, well, actually, I've been around the world and I know a sea and I know a lake. And believe me, Galilee is not a sea, it's a lake. So he always calls it the Lake of Galilee. And he saw two boats standing by the shore, and the fishermen had got out of them and they were washing their nets. That's what fishermen do. And he went in on one of the boats, which was Simon's, and he asked him to push out a little bit from the land. And he sat down, and from the boat he started teaching the crowds. And when he stopped talking, and you can imagine Simon was a bit fed up with this because he hasn't asked permission, he's just gone aboard the ship. He asked him to put out, and he sat down, and from the boat he started teaching the crowds. And when finally he stopped talking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon replied, and Simon is clearly saying, I've got to humor this lunatic, but he is crazy. Simon said, "Master, all night long we've been fishing and we've caught nothing. But at your word, I'll let down the nets." And yes, you've guessed it. When they did this, they enclosed a huge sum of fish, and their nets were breaking. And they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came, and the two boats were filled so that they were almost sinking. Now, watch Simon's reaction. And Simon Peter fell at the knees of Jesus, and he said, "Get away from me, because I am a sinful man, Lord." For wonder had seized him and all those with him at the catch of fish which they had taken. And likewise Jacob and John, the sons of Zebedee, they were partners for Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid from now on," and this is a bit of a joke, but you may not be able to laugh at it. "From now on, you're going to catch human beings." And they took the boats onto the land, and they left everything and followed him. Listen to that phrase, they left everything and followed him. You're going to hear that again and again tonight. That's what disciples do. So what have we got so far? Well, he's put it in a slightly different place from what he found in Mark, a bit later in the Gospel. He boards Peter's boat without permission. He gives instructions about fishing, which the fishermen reluctantly obey. But the results are spectacular. The nets were tearing. And then, did you notice Simon's response? "Get away from me. I'm a sinful person." And then the group expands, and we discover that the sons of Zebedee are there. And then you've got that joke about fishermen. And then, as I said earlier, we see what disciples do. They draw up their boats on land, and they abandon everything and followed him. And that's what disciples do in Luke. What else do disciples do in Luke? Well, they glorify God. And you say, "Oh, well, yes, I know all that." But actually, glorifying God is a special Luke thing. And it's only in Luke's Gospel that you find this really happening. This is in 5:25 to 26. And straight away he stood up before them. This is the man who had the withered hand. Sorry, no, it's the man, the paralytic. And he lifted up what he was lying on, that's his stretcher, and he went off home glorifying God. There's that key phrase. And they were all filled with fear, which is a kind of awe or reverence, saying, "We have seen amazing things today." And that word for amazing is similar to the word for glorify. And you get that same idea of glorifying God. Do you remember on Christmas night when the shepherds, chapter 2, verse 20, if you're still following, the shepherds went home glorifying and praising God over all that they'd seen and heard just as he'd spoken to them. Two things about that. One is that's what disciples do. They glorify and praise God. But the second thing to notice is that they are the lower classes. The fisher persons are not aristocrats. They're very ordinary people, and even more so is that true of the disciples. So there's glorifying God. It happens several times. Chapter 7, verse 6. I'll go through some of these references. You've got them on your notes, I know, and you can look them up later on tonight. Fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and the Lord has God has visited his people." Notice that that glorification of God, and that's after the story, extraordinary story of the marriage feast at Cana in chapter 7. Then the next one is in chapter 13, verse 13. They're wonderful stories, and Luke is a great, great storyteller. He laid his hands on her. This was the woman who'd been bent double for 18 years. He laid his hands on her, and straight away she was straightened up, and she glorified God. You see, that is what disciples do. And here's another one, chapter 17, verse 15. One of them, do you remember the extraordinary story of the 10 lepers? And one of them came back, and he was a Samaritan, a foreigner. And one of them, seeing that he was cured, returned with a loud voice, glorifying God. He's the hero of that story, and it's a spectacular result. And here's another one, 1843. These are all glorifying God, and it's what you're supposed to do when you go out of here tonight. This is the blind man just on the way to just outside Jericho. Straight away he recovered his sight, and he followed Jesus, glorifying God. And the whole people, seeing this, gave praise to God. So you see, that's what we disciples do. We glorify and give praise to God. And then one last one, 23:47. This is the centurion. Very unexpected, this. The centurion, seeing what had happened, started to glorify God, saying, "Truly, this man was just or innocent." So that's right at the moment of his death, and not the kind of person you would expect to be a disciple, but he jolly well is a disciple. Okay, so a bit more on what disciples do. This next passage is at chapter 5, verses 27 to 31. And this is a calling story, and this is the first disciple, no, it's the second disciple, I suppose, but a very unexpected one, who is called to follow Jesus. After this, Jesus went out, and he saw a certain tax collector by name of Levi. Now, we're expecting Jesus to yell and scream at him because this man is so wicked. He's sitting at the tax desk, and to our astonishment, he said to him, "Follow me." And he left everything. Have we heard that phrase at all before? Yes, we have. And stood up and followed him. And he gave a great reception. I'll come back to that. Levi gave a great reception for him in his house. And there was a great crowd of tax collectors and others who were with him, lying down to eat. And the Pharisees muttered. The Greek word there is ekongizon, and you can hear the anger in it, can't you? The Pharisees and their scribes muttered to the disciples, saying, "Why do you people eat and drink with tax collectors and with sinners?" And Jesus replied and said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a doctor, only those who are in a bad way." So do you see, it's the unexpected people who get called to discipleship. And if you are now thinking, "I can't possibly be called to discipleship because I'm such a bad person," then watch out, because it probably means that the call is coming to you. So actually, Levi is a model disciple. I mentioned that the word there used for a party was reception. That you'll find that at 5:29. You'll also find it at chapter 14, verse 13. And it's related to a word in Luke's gospel. Dechomai is the Greek word, which means to receive, to give hospitality. And that's one of the marks in Luke's gospel of being a good disciple. The first person of whom it's said in the whole gospel is good old Simeon. Do you remember this? The parents bring Jesus into the temple to be purified, and he received him into his arms. That word for received is the hospitality word. And so we're meant to applaud Simeon when he does that. There are one or two other uses of the word. I won't go through them all, but some of them are really quite interesting. Here's chapter 9, verse 48. I hope you don't mind my flinging numbers at you like a kind of Bible bingo, but they're worth having. Keep that Bible open in front of you and keep chasing through the references and mark them as useful to come back to later on. Jesus said to them, this is when the disciples think they know better than Jesus who is important. They think children are too small to be important. Jesus is not of that view. So this is chapter 9, verse 48. Jesus took a child and put it before him, and he said to them, whoever receives, there's that receive hospitality word, gives hospitality to this little child in my name, gives hospitality to me, and whoever gives hospitality to me gives hospitality to the one who sent me. So do you see the line there which goes God, Jesus, unimportant people? Very important and very close to the gospel. And this is something Pope Francis is telling us all the time, isn't it? So that's that. And then what's the next thing disciples do? Well, they do the wrong sort of thing, but Jesus defends them. Chapter 6, verse 1. And it happened on the Sabbath. Anytime in the Gospels you hear the word Sabbath, watch out, because there's going to be trouble. And so it is the case here. It happened on a Sabbath. He was journeying through the sown fields, and his disciples were plucking. And you're not allowed to pluck on the Sabbath because that counts as harvesting, and you're not allowed to harvest on the Sabbath. And they were eating the ears of corn, rubbing them with their hands. And some of the Pharisees said, anytime you see Pharisees and Sabbath day together in any of the Gospels, know there will be trouble. Why, they say, are you doing what is not permitted on the Sabbath? So then Jesus jumps in and defends his disciples. Jesus replied and said to them, did you not read what David said when he was hungry and those who were with him, how he went into the house of God and took the bread of offering and ate it and gave it to his companions? And it's not permitted to eat those except only for the priests. So Jesus is saying, and we must learn to hear this, that the rules are not the end of the story. And he was saying to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. What's the next thing that happens with regard to disciples? Well, the next thing that happens is that Jesus prays before picking them. Now you look at the list and you might say, well, couldn't Jesus have done a bit better than that? Well, never mind that, but notice that at every key moment in Jesus' life, he prays. And it happened in those days, it happened in those days that he went out into the mountain, we don't know where the mountain was, to pray. And he spent all night in prayer before God. And when day came, he summoned his disciples. So you see, Jesus has to pray to summon you and me to be disciples. And he chose 12 of them, whom he called apostles. An apostle is simply someone who is sent, and you and I are sent. There was Simon, whom he nicknamed Rock, and Andrew, Simon's brother, and Jacob and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, and Jacob of Alphaeus, and Simon called the Zealot, and Judas of Jacob, and Judas Iscariot, who turned into a traitor. So that's that pretty ropey lot that he chose after a night spent in prayer. Jesus also chose you after a night spent in prayer, and if you think that the disciples are a pretty ropey lot, then so are we. So be cheered by that discovery. And then chapter 6, still verse 17, in Matthew's Gospel, you've got the Sermon on the Mount. In Luke's Gospel, you've got the Sermon on the Plain, and it's pretty challenging stuff. 6:17, he went down with them and stood on a plain area, and a big crowd of his disciples and a huge number of the people from all Judea and Jerusalem and the seashore of Tyre and Sidon. Notice that the gospel is spreading outwards. The first two of those places are in the Holy Land. The other two are in Gentile territory. And what you can see is the gospel going outwards to Gentiles. And that's people like you and me. Most of the people listening to this tonight are Gentiles, not Jews, because that's the way the gospel has gone tonight and over the last 2,000 years. And then, still on the Sermon on the Plain, disciples have a very different set of values. This is something Pope Francis is trying to teach us. And listen to this. And he lifted up his eyes to the disciples and said, "Congratulations to the destitute, because yours is the kingdom of God. Congratulations to those who are hungry now, because you're going to be sated. Congratulations to those who are now weeping, because you're going to laugh. Congratulations to you when people hate you and when they separate you out and reproach you and cast out your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Rejoice on that day and be glad." Most of us, if we're insulted, ring our lawyer to say, how much money can I get out of that insult? Jesus doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to rejoice in that day and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. That's what Jesus' disciples do. And then listen to the opposite of that. "But woe to you who are wealthy, because you've already got your comfort. Woe to you who are filled now, you're going to be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, you're going to mourn and weep." So do you see, disciples' values, and you and I are disciples, are very, very different. We've got a different set of values. And we go on. Chapter 8, verses 1 to 3, very important moment. This Luke is the gospel of women, and notice that women are very important in the group of disciples. "And it happened on the next day, and he was traveling through towns and villages, proclaiming and preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God, and the 12 were with him, and certain women," so they're also there, "who had been cured of evil and sick demons, spirits, and they were Mary called the Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been cast out, and had come out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the steward of Herod." So upper end of the classes of that society, "and Susanna and many other women who looked after them from their possession." So women are there and very, very important. So we go on. Chapter 8, verse 9. What else do disciples do? They ask dumb questions, and you and I are allowed to ask our dumb questions. And I hope you're all writing down lots and lots of difficult questions for when I finally stop talking. His disciples asked him, "So what about this parable?" This is the parable of the sower, which isn't a very easy one to interpret. So they're not too far off by inquiring about the meaning of the parables. Then what's the next thing that disciples do? Well, they think they're dying. Chapter 8, verses 22 to 25. "And it happened on one of the days, and he went into a boat and his disciples." So they're still there, we're still there. "And he said to them, 'Let's go to the other side of the lake.'" Notice he doesn't call it the sea. This is Luke. It's the lake of Galilee. "And they went aboard, and as they were sailing, he fell asleep. And there came a great storm of wind onto the lake," there's that word again, "and they were filled up and they were in danger. And they approached and they woke him up, saying, 'Master, Master.'" I want you to remember that word master. Normally a disciple calls Jesus Lord, Kyrios. It's a very, very high expression. When Peter, back in chapter 5, said, "All right, I'm going to go fishing for you if you like," he described Jesus as master. If you're calling Jesus only master, you haven't fully understood who this is. Interestingly, in Mark's version of the story, the disciples wake Jesus up and say, "Don't you care? We're dying." Well, Luke has moved that to, well, we'll see it later on in the story of Martha and Mary. Watch out for that. Do not care. So they think they're dying and they wake Jesus up. That's what they do. Then chapter 8, verse 51, some of the disciples get singled out for special treatment. He went into a house and he did not, this is the story of Jairus' daughter. Remember that lovely story of the girl who was either dying or dead? He went into the house and he didn't allow anyone to come in with him except Peter and John and Jacob. That's the two sons of Zebedee, and the father and mother of the child. And they were all weeping and mourning over her. But so there are special people among the disciples. But notice that all three of those, Peter, James and John, they all make mistakes about their discipleship. They all make their bid for power and glory, which you and I are not supposed to do if we're going to be good disciples. And then here are the instructions for a disciple. So I hope you're noting this all down and saying, this is what I'm going to be like. He summoned the 12 and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. Are you happy with this? And he sent them to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. And he said to them, don't take anything for the journey. Don't take a stick or a wallet or a loaf of bread. Don't take a credit card, well, something like that. And don't have more than one tunic, so they'll be a bit smelly. And any house you go into, stay there and come out from there. And if they give you hospitality, there's that receiving word again, come out from that place. If they don't receive you, come out from that city, shake the dust off your feet as a witness against them. And they went out and they went through all the villages, gospeling and curing everywhere. That is what disciples do. And who else does that? Yes, you're right. It's Jesus who does that. So there's the thing. You and I as disciples are supposed to do precisely what Jesus does. Are you happy with that? That is your vocation. So that's 9:1-6. Chapter 9, verse 10. After that very successful debriefing, after that very successful mission, they have a debriefing. And this is how that goes. That the apostles returned and explained to him what great things they'd done. And he took them privately to a city called Bethsaida, and the crowds knew and they followed him, and they gave him he gave them hospitality. He received them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God. So they're not going to get their moment of debriefing, it seems. And he cured all the people who were in need of healing. And I think that's all. Instead of getting a debriefing, this is what happens. The disciples say, this is chapter 9, verse 12, send the crowd away that they may journey off into the villages round about and search the fields and find some food, because here we are in this desert place. And he said to them, you lot, give them something to eat yourselves. This is what we disciples are supposed to do. And they said, well, there's no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish here. Do you want us to go and buy something buy food for all these people? For there are about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, tell them to lie down in groups of about 50. And they did so, and they all lay down. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looked up to heaven, and he blessed them, and he broke, and he gave it to his disciples to offer to the crowd, and they ate, and they were all sated, and they took up from what was surplus, they took up 12 baskets of fragments. It's as easy as that if you're a disciple of Jesus. So that's what discipleship looks like. But also disciples have to learn that Jesus is a suffering Messiah. And that means that you and I have to learn that. And we have to recognize that suffering will also come our way if we're foolish enough to become Jesus's disciples. This is how it goes, verse 22 of chapter 9. He told them that the Son of Man had to suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and on the 3rd day rise again. And we hardly notice the prediction of rising again, because what really strikes us is that terrible prediction of his death. And this is what discipleship looks like. And he was saying to all of them, If anyone wants to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross, which of course we're going to watch Jesus doing at the end of this gospel. Take up their cross every day and follow me. That's a discipleship word. For whoever wants to save their life is going to destroy it. Whoever destroys their life for my sake, that person is going to save it. What does it help a person to gain the entire world and suffer the loss of his self? Whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, the Son of Man is going to be ashamed of that person when he comes in his glory from the Father and the glory of the holy angels. So that's discipleship for you. I hope you're feeling comfortable with that. And disciples, I have to tell you, are not always successful. Have you noticed that? We don't always make a complete success of this vocation of ours. And this is, they come down the mountain after the transfiguration, and they meet a crowd, and the crowd is complaining because the disciples haven't been able to cure someone. And this is what the father of the child says. And look, a spirit seizes him, and suddenly he shouts out and convulses him with foaming, and he can hardly go because of what's afflicting him. And I asked your disciples to expel it, and they were unable to do it, so they couldn't do it. Disciples, you see, are not always successful, but Jesus still wants us to be his disciples. Then there's another thing that disciples do. Have you ever noticed this happening in the church? I don't know. There was an argument among them, that's among the disciples, who was the biggest of them? And Jesus knew about the argument of their hearts, and he took a little child and he put it before him, and he said to them, I've quoted this phrase already this evening, the one about receiving. Whoever receives this little child in my name receives me. Whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. So you see the equivalence here. A child is equivalent to Jesus, and Jesus is equivalent to God. It completely reverses all our normal values, and yet there's some profound, profound wisdom there. So we can't quarrel about our status, nor, alas, can we mount terrorist attacks. Why do I say that? Well, because the disciples wanted to do that. This is the beginning, chapter 9, verse 51. When Luke starts a journey to Jerusalem. We know what's going to happen in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the place where he's going to die. But this is how it starts. And it happened when the days were fulfilled of his being taken up. That being taken up, we know what that means. It's the Passion. And he had set his face to journey. It's a favorite word of Luke, that journey to Jerusalem. And he sent angels or messengers before his face, and they journeyed, and they went into a village of the Samaritans. Remember, their traditional enemies. We have seen already the Samaritan who thanked Jesus for being cured of his leprosy. So into the village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. And they did not give him hospitality because his face was journeying towards Jerusalem. That can happen to disciples. It can happen to you. Now, here's the reaction, and it mustn't be your reaction. I'm sorry, you may be tempted to react like this, but please don't. The disciples, Jacob and John, saw this, and they said, Lord, do you want us to order fire to come down from heaven and destroy them? So they wanted to let off a bomb. Religious people sometimes do that, but it is not a part of Christianity. So that's in chapter 9, verses 54 and so on. Then at the end of that chapter, chapter 9, verse 57, you get three interesting reactions to, or approaches to, discipleship. The first is enthusiastic. As they were journeying on the way, someone said to Jesus, I'm going to follow you wherever you're going. And then listen to the slightly discouraging response of Jesus, which we must listen to because it's addressed to us too. He said, foxes have nests, or no, burrows, and the birds of the air have tents or dwelling places, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So do you want to follow Jesus? You might end up on the streets. And then here's the next one. Jesus said to another, "Follow me." And he said, "Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father." Not an unreasonable request, you may think, but listen to Jesus' response. He said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and announce the kingdom of God." So there is an urgency about this vocation of ours, yours and mine. That's the second one. Here's the third one. Another one said, "I'm going to follow you, Lord." Now he calls him Lord, not Master, so he's got something right. "I'm going to follow you, Lord, but first of all, let me go and say goodbye to the people at home." Not a bad request, is it? And Jesus said to him, "No one who puts his hand to the plough and looks backwards is going to be fit for the kingdom of God." If you look backwards when you're driving a plough, you make a wiggly mess in the field. So don't do that. So you've got to be totally enthusiastic for this call of discipleship. And then straight into that, you get chapter 10. I'll read a few verses of this because it's quite interesting. 10, 1 to 12. After this, Jesus appointed 72 others, and he sent them 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place where he was going to go. And he was saying to them, "The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So ask the Lord of the harvest to send workers into the harvest." And God knows we know that's true today, don't we? Off you go. "See, I'm sending you like lambs in the midst of wolves." And he's not just talking to those disciples. He's talking to you at home tonight. Don't carry a wallet. Don't carry a credit card. Don't wear sandals. Don't greet anyone on the way. So it's tough stuff, this. "And any house you go into, first say, 'Peace be to this house.' And wherever there's a son of peace, your peace will come back on you. Otherwise, it will rest on him. Otherwise, it'll come back to you. But in that house remain eating and drinking what they offer you, for the laborer is worthy of his wages. And go from house to house." And then twice we hear them, what they have to preach about. It's the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God has drawn near to you. Twice he says that. That's what you and I have to say. And we've got to look for the clues of the kingdom of God being near. And we can see it, even during this COVID virus. It's very, very evident. Now, we're not going to be able to go through all the passages that I've listed, and you can take your notes away after tonight. But let me just give you a few more. I'll give you the 2 ways of being disciples. Chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. As I say, Luke's gospel is very much the gospel of women. Now listen to these 2 very lovely women. "As they were journeying, he went into a certain village, and a certain woman called Martha received him." That's the hospitality word, so we might translate it, "gave him hospitality." So we're meant to applaud Martha. "And she had a sister called Mariam, and she sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to his word." Is there a tension between those 2? Not really. They're just 2 very different ways of being disciples. But Martha loses it slightly, as you might have done at home occasionally when your brother and sister left you to wash the dishes alone. "And Martha was torn apart with much service, and she loomed over him." You shouldn't do that, really. "And said, 'Lord, don't you care?'" That's the "don't you care" that he found in the story of the storm on the sea in Mark's version. "Don't you care that this sister of mine," and she's so angry she can't give her a name, "has left me alone to serve? Tell her to help me." That's really giving orders, isn't it? "And the Lord said to her, 'Martha, Martha.'" Isn't that lovely? "Martha, Martha, you're concerned and worry about many things, but only one thing is there need, for Mary has chosen the good portion, which is not going to be taken away from her." And then just one little bit more of teaching, chapter 14, verses 25 to 33. "And there were journeying with him many crowds, and he turned and said to them, 'If someone comes to me and does,'" now this is you with your vocation, "'doesn't hate his father and his mother and his wife and his children and his brothers and his sisters, and indeed his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever doesn't carry their own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So discipleship is a tough business. Don't mess around with it. It really is tough, but it's worth doing. It's certainly worth doing. Then I'll jump a bit, chapter 18, verses 15 to 17. The disciples get it wrong about who Jesus is really interested in. They were bringing to him little children for him to touch them, and the disciples saw it and they rebuked them. But Jesus called them and said, "Let the children come to me. Don't stop them, because of such people is the kingdom of God." Amen. I'm telling you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child, that person will not be able to get into it. One last story. It's the story of Zacchaeus, and one of you mentioned it last week in the questions. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. It's chapter 19, verses 1 to 9. And we're very much on the journey to Jerusalem. We're almost there now, but Jericho just on the outskirts. And they came, and he went through Jericho, and behold, a man called Zacchaeus by name. Zacchaeus is a short version of Zechariah, whom we met back in chapter 1. And he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. So in Luke's gospel, he's got two strikes against him. He's rich, and he's a head tax collector, not just an ordinary tax collector, he's a head tax collector. But then he wins our sympathy. He was seeking to see Jesus, who he was. So we're meant to be interested in it. What is he doing? And he couldn't because of the crowd, because he was vertically challenged. And then we applaud as he takes his next move, and he ran forward and he climbed into a sycamore tree in order to see him, because he was about to pass that way. And as he came to the place, Jesus looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus," and you can imagine Zacchaeus burying his head in his hands and saying, "Oh no, I'm going to be torn apart now. Hurry up and come down, because today I must stay at your house." Just imagine the feeling of Zacchaeus when that's said to him. It can happen to you when you hear the call of Jesus, because today salvation is coming to your house. And one last thing, how did disciples function? Chapter 24, this is right at the end of the gospel, and then I'm going to pause and you can start thinking of really difficult questions to ask. This is chapter 24, verses 52 to 53. The very last words of the gospel are like this: "And they worshipped him, and they returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they were all the time in the temple blessing God." There's the challenge for you. You've been through all that suffering, all the business of Jesus' passion. You've failed, you've committed sins, you've run away. But at the end, Jesus has said it's all right. And all you have to do now is pray. So you go with great joy into Jerusalem, you go with joy to the temple, and then you meet at home. And we'll be reading about that next week with fellowship. So I'm going to stop, otherwise you'll get terribly bored. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Father Nathan.